Skating next to the castle. Look at this castle. Wow. I think this is the biggest castle we've been to so far, isn't it? So apparently we can't go in at the moment. Here's the moat. Apparently you can walk down the moat. Do you want to walk down the moat? Yeah, we'll try the other way then. Got the weather for it. Morning.
You got hand stamps to go through to the main castle? Perfect, thank you, enjoy. Just want to go round to the left and over the bridge to go to the main area.
Thanks, mate.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, you. Not so bad. Do you have any feedback?
No. No, all I've heard about taxi.
Yeah? Another peacock.
Winter Birds of Prey, 12 p.m. Go watch the Winter Birds of Prey at 12.
There it is, I've got a lock.
I want to go and see the Winter Birds of Prey
At some point, yeah.
at 12 o'clock.
Yeah, so going in. Hopefully the right way. Oh my goodness.
What was the name?
A little door for you, Cal.
Like the bear pit place, I think.
This has got to be the biggest castle that we've been to so far. Gotta be.
Do you want to walk all the way around? 500 plus steps.
Oh, not this narrow,
Huh?
steep stairway stuff again.
Yeah.
I should have been prepared for this really, shouldn't I?
What do you mean?
Right, where are we starting then?
Do you want to go up and around?
Do we do that?
Do you want to do that?
I was thinking maybe walk around the perimeter first, then go up. I'm not even sure if I'm going to bother with my camera. I'm not sure yet. Wow. Humongous tower.
You can stay in one of these.
Really?
Yeah.
I would love that.
Huh? Shall we save up?
I'm pretty sure you could stay in one of the other castles as well.
Shall we save up and do it then?
Yeah, definitely. Do you reckon, guys, a video of me and Kelly staying in Warwick Castle? Maybe when the weather's warmer next year, yeah?
Sorry, Bruce, no more donations.
No more donations. Yeah. Look at that. Ooh. Oh, that's a good view. It's a good shot, isn't it? Lovely sky, not too bad. Crazy clouds though, crazy hazy. Such a big castle.
Do a tour?
Yeah, sure. What? Like in a few minutes? Yeah.
Shall we do that one?
Yeah. Do you think maybe we've got time to go around and then go around the top, or should we just go around the perimeter and then...
Do you want us to do everything else and then see if we can do I'm just going to go for the toilet then.
Okie dokie, koala. Castle Gardener. Keeping everything looking nice. Oh, 9 try. Cannot go in this one. Ah. I think I will get my camera out for this one.
I mean, is it going to go on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough, that's fine. So yeah, we'll get started back in the year 1066, when William the Conqueror, as his name may suggest, conquered England. He defeated the Saxon King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and the Saxons who lived here were not happy about it. So William had to start building castles all over England to essentially cement the fact he had conquered the place. People couldn't really argue when a whopping great castle appeared in a town overnight. I do mean overnight, as most of the castles he built took about 6 weeks to build. I know, they're originally motte and bailey castles. So all of the dirt from the outside wall was piled up into a big man-made hill or mound, so there's one we made earlier. On there you put a nice wooden keep. That whole thing is the motte. Down here was a surrounding wooden wall called the bailey, so a motte and bailey castle. The actual hill itself may have taken a bit longer to build, but the wooden piece of the castle here took about 3 weeks to build. It's because those pieces were made in Normandy, where William was from, and then were just sort of shipped over here and assembled like a big flat pack. Finished in 1068, so
Wow.
not long after the Battle of Hastings, really.
Which are the most houses nowadays.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, it was a fairly quick castle, and that's why they had to be quick, because you couldn't spend ages building it, because someone would just stop you building it. Now, William, we think, built about 200 castles, and one man can't look after 200 castles. So William hands them out to people. He gave them to friends and to allies and people he wanted to bribe to be his friend and ally. And this one was given to a man named Henry de Newburgh, also known as Henry de Beaumont, as they are the same man. Now, he was made our constable, and then in the year 1088 he was actually made our first Earl of Warwick. And I do mean first Earl of Warwick. We've had 4 first Earls of Warwick. Now the way that works is when you run out of heirs, your title goes back to the king or the queen, and then they hand that title back out again. When they do, it starts back at 1, which makes the whole thing fairly confusing. We are currently on our 9th Earl of Warwick in our 4th line, but actually he's our 36th Earl of Warwick, but we'll talk more about him later. Now the de Newburgh family keep the castle for about sort of 200 years in their family, which is not too bad for one family, but eventually they are left with only one daughter, and her name is Margaret de Newburgh. Now unfortunately, a woman can't have a castle and title on her own at that time, so Margaret de Newburgh has to be married. So she is married off as a Christmas present to a man named John du Plessis by the king. Now I'm not sure who the Christmas present was for. The two of them hated each other. They only met a grand total of 3 times in their life, and one of those times was their wedding day. So they were not the best of friends. In fact, they just spent their whole lives pretending they weren't married in the first place. But it worked pretty well because they had no heirs, but it can go to nephews and cousins. It doesn't have to go just to children. So eventually it passes to a slightly more distantly related family called the de Beauchamp family, or the Beecham family. It depends who you ask and whether you're French or not. So to talk about them, we're going to head around the courtyard and towards the large walls and towers they built in the 14th century. We'll head around this way. If you've got any questions, feel free to jump in because it is just you two at the minute.
Yeah.
Otherwise I'm just talking at you. You know.
Certainly the biggest castle we've been to so far, isn't it? It's massive.
It's sort of footprint of the actual building inside is not all that big. It's quite a long building. But it's not the smallest castle, certainly. It's also standing in pretty good condition as well. Which,
It's in amazing condition.
there is a good reason why we're in good condition, but we'll get on to that. Wonderful. So at this point we get to the de Beauchamp family, who are known as great warriors and fighters. They fight for us, England, in the 100 Years' War, which is a period of fighting between us and France that lasted for 116 years. They just call it the 100 Years' War anyway. And you may notice that even with my accent, the word de Beauchamp sounds quite French. And so they changed the way you pronounce their name, we think, from de Beauchamp to Beecham instead. It's still spelt the same way, so it's still spelt B-E-A-U, which is a French spelling, but we think you can just say it either way essentially. They were such good warriors and fighters that they got their money through capturing French knights and nobles and ransoming them back to their homes in France. Using that money, they built the walls and towers behind me. So clearly these people are worth quite a lot of money, as these walls and towers are fairly impressive. Now the tower on the far side over there, that one is Caesar's Tower. Caesar's Tower actually used to be known as Poitiers Tower, named after the Battle of Poitiers in the 100 Years' War. But the Earl, we think, realised that people hadn't really heard of the Battle of Poitiers very often, so they changed its name to Caesar's. Because if I ask, how many people know about Julius Caesar, it's more than the Battle of Poitiers. That whole tower is a prison tower, the whole thing. Now people often hear this and they go, it must have been horrible, it must have been dark and dingy, and people were tortured in there, and no they weren't. Prisoners kept in there were given a nice big bed, hot meals every day, servants, they were given sort of the ability to walk around the grounds and gardens and go hunting in the fields beyond. Because the people kept in there were knights, earls, nobles, and the one thing that ties them all together, they are rich. That is the most important thing really. So you don't want to mistreat them. If you mistreated them, they might not survive the journey back home again, and you are not going to get your ransom money. That is the whole point really. Now at the bottom of that tower we do have a jail, and in that jail we do have an oubliette. We're not sure it actually is an oubliette. We think it probably actually isn't. It's more likely just a toilet. As people that weren't important, people more likely to be held in a place like an oubliette, were held in the town jail instead, not here at Warwick Castle. Now in the middle here we have our gatehouse of Barbican, which is the strong and scary defensive point of the castle. Really in the 1300s, except for another gate down that way that's no longer there, this is the only entrance. So because it's just two of you, we'll head inside there and have a look at it close up.
Oh, wicked.
Around this way.
Sorry?
Normally we'd come in this way, don't we?
Unfortunately because of the ice rig, can't get past it.
We came round and we were like,
Oh no.
look at it, go the other way.
Yeah, the ice rig's sort of blocking up most of that entrance, unfortunately. And the front gate does come up and down. This back one here is a show gate, this one doesn't work, but the front one does, so we can raise and lower it as we need. So yeah, so this is our gatehouse in Barbican, the scary defensive point of the castle. Now over there, you may have seen we've got a stone bridge. There used to be a wooden drawbridge there, we think, but that's no longer there anymore. And that goes over the moat around the outside. Now people often hear the word moat and they go, oh, it must have been full of water, had little fish and ducks swimming past. It was all very nice. Our moat has never had water in it. It's actually a dry ditch or a foss. So rather than water, something else goes in there instead. At this time in history, we did not have nice flushing toilets. People usually used buckets. Now, if you are that side of the castle, you have to take your bucket over the wall and into the river. If you are any of this side of the castle, you're not going to bring your bucket down the stairs and run across the courtyard. You just empty it over the wall and into the ditch. So in there was loads of sewage and also big wooden spikes. So if you did fall in there, you're A, going to be impaled on a spike, and B, you're then going to drown in sewage, which is not all that ideal, really. Now get past any of that and into our Barbican, you're not safe in here either. Because we have these two spiked wooden gates. These are the portcullis gates, and they work in two different ways. Either we bring both down and people use a battering ram to get in, or we just close this one. We let people run into here, then we close that one behind them. They are then trapped in an area that's official name is the killing zone. And there are no prizes for guessing why it's likely called the killing zone. It's for killing people. You may have noticed there is no ceiling in here. There's never been a ceiling in here. You have archers up there loosing arrows at people, quite like shooting fish in a barrel. You also have archers or crossbowmen in the walls at the side as well, loosing more bolts at people. So you're not safe at all. Now if you think you are safe by lifting up the portcullis gate and hiding where you two are standing just there above you, there are some holes. Those holes are called the murder holes. And again, there is no prizes for guessing what the murder holes are for. Richard is probably our most famous Earl of Warwick, and he's usually known by his nickname. His nickname is the Kingmaker. So to find out why he's called the Kingmaker, we'll head to the base of Caesar's Tower and where the Kingmaker attractions start. So we'll head around this corner. Come on, this boy. Oh, are you?
Knight's Tower. Wow.
So there's definitely a better view of Caesar's Tower from this side. Caesar's Tower is technically the longer tower. Guy's Tower is technically the taller tower. If that makes any sense. Caesar's Tower starts lower down. So therefore there's actually more height on that tower than there is on the other side. But it doesn't look like that from the courtyard. It's a little bit of a weird thing, really. Yes, so it starts a lot lower down, really, towards the river. So technically that is like a longer tower. But that one looks taller on the other side. So at this point we get to Richard Neville and the Wars of the Roses, which is a hideously complicated period of history, lasting for around about 30 years, and I'm going to try and condense it down into about 5 minutes, so bear with me here. Now the Wars of the Roses isn't actually known as the Wars of the Roses until much later in history. It was originally known as the Cousins' War, as many of the key players were cousins of one another. It makes the family trees all horrendously confusing, and it only gets worse when everyone starts marrying one another as well, but we'll get onto that later. It's also known as the House of York and the House of Lancaster. I'm aware that here in England we have two different places called York and Lancaster, and Yorkshire and Lancashire. The Wars of the Roses has nothing to do with York and Lancaster, and nothing to do with Yorkshire and Lancashire. It's about the house titles, not the places themselves, like at all. The king at the beginning of the Wars of the Roses was Henry VI. He was a Lancastrian, and one of the worst kings of England we've ever had. Unfortunately, Henry suffers from mental health problems, spends months catatonic, forgets his own name. He's not aware his own son has been born. He doesn't make a good king, he's not aware of his surroundings. And so every time he is too sick to rule, his cousin, a man named Richard the Duke of York, looks after the country for him. He's never crowned, but he acts as protector. Every time Henry gets better, Richard is kicked out of court. Every time Henry gets ill again, Richard is brought back to the throne. You can see the problem here. People start to want someone like Richard to be king. He's proving himself to be a better ruler. And so when Richard dies in a battle, the onus goes on to Richard's son, his eldest son, Edward the Earl of March. He is about 18 at this time, and he crowns himself King of England anyway. He essentially goes, I'm Edward IV now, deal with it. And proceeds to improve it by defeating the previous King Henry and his men at the Battle of Towton, 1461. At the Battle of Towton, about 50,000 men fight, about 28,000 men die. That is 1% of the UK population at the time, and they only fight for 10 hours. That is a horrendous amount of men to die, and that probably does not account for the people back home that would have starved as well. Their main breadwinners never coming home again. The families definitely would starve. It's said that the fields and the rivers around Towton ran red with blood for 3 days after that battle, so not a good time for anybody, except for Edward. He has cemented himself as king, and as the previous King Henry, locked up in the Tower of London. Now Edward only managed to do this with help of his friends and his family, one of those being his cousin, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick. Richard was older, had his own army, he could raise an army of his own, he was very, very rich, and really he was acting as a puppet master to the new king. He really thinks that at this time in history, we don't marry for love, we marry for politics, and that's what everyone else really thinks as well. Now we've just lost the 100 Years' War with France. We need a good political tie with France. The best thing Edward could do would be to marry a French princess. Makes sense, really. So Richard Neville, being very helpful, goes to France to find one. And when he comes back with Bonner of Savoy, Edward, the genius, has already gotten married. In secret. To a woman named Elizabeth Woodville. Now, you may be able to tell, Elizabeth Woodville does not sound very French. Because she's not. Though of course we don't know exactly where he was. He may have been in the prison tower. We know he was here in Warwick. He also may have been in what were the Earl's bedrooms down at the back of the castle. Eventually though, he is taken to Midland Castle up north, as it's also owned by the Neville family. And eventually people say, hang on, that's the King of England. You cannot just keep him locked up in Warwick Castle and Midland. You've got to let him go. And so Richard is forced to let Edward go, and he flees to Holland, which is fair enough. Leaving Richard to go to London, to the Tower of London, and release Henry, the previous king, and recrown him. That is why he's known as the Kingmaker. He has somewhat successfully made 2 different kings of England. First he helped to crown Edward IV, and he recrowned Henry VI. However, men that meddle in the affairs of kings don't always tend to do all that well, and eventually Edward returns with an army, and defeats Richard Neville at the Battle of Barnet, 1471. At that battle, Richard Neville has got twice the number of men of the enemy, so he is sure he will win. What he does, splits them in half. Sends one half straight into the battlefield, and one half to sort of push princes in the tower. Now in around the sort of 1600s, the skeletons of 2 young boys, roughly matching a 12 and a 9-year-old size, were found under the chapel steps in the Tower of London. They were buried as the princes, but the church and the monarchy will not let us dig them up and DNA them. So we have no idea if it actually is them or not, and even if we did dig them up, at this point, a little bit too late really, there's not too much point in going for that. So with the 2 boys gone, this means next in line to the throne is the regent, Richard the Duke of Gloucester, who you may know by another name, Richard III. Now Richard III also technically looks after this castle, as at this time the castle and title are owned by his nephew, who's about 3 years old. He's called Edward Plantagenet, so he's not old enough to look after it. So Richard III looks after it for him. Right across the courtyard is that green hut. He didn't build that, but behind there are 2 small towers called Bear Tower and Clarence Tower. It was supposed to be sort of a bit of a court building, but was never finished, as Richard only ruled for 2 years before he was killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 by Henry Tudor's men. He was the last English monarch to die on the battlefield, so congratulations to him. And after the battle, his body went completely missing. No one knew what happened to him until about 10 or so years ago. Richard was found under a car park in Leicester. So until then we had literally no idea where the King of England had gone, and it was just a council car park for a few hundred years. But with him gone, someone else has to take the throne, and that'd be Henry Tudor, the man that essentially killed him. Now, Henry Tudor also takes his castle around this time, because eventually Edward Plantagenet is also executed in his 20s. Now, when we have an earl, the title goes to the king, and so Henry Tudor looks after it, and he wants nothing to do with it. We were owned by his enemy, so he lets us fall into ruin. Let's talk about that, and to finish, we'll head back into the courtyard just over this way. I think her last name is. She was on the news recently and said, I've got some interesting information to come out with next year. So there's maybe a chance that maybe she's found something. Maybe, but we just don't really know, unfortunately. Which is a shame, but yeah, we have absolutely no idea what happened to them. Shakespeare claimed that Richard killed them. We don't know. Shakespeare claimed a lot of things. So at this point we get to the Tudors, and the Tudors don't really care about us. It wasn't actually until Henry Tudor's son, Henry VIII, on his deathbed, handed us to the Dudley family that anyone really cared. The Dudleys being known as the favourite courtiers of Elizabeth I. You may have heard of Robert Dudley. He owned Kenilworth Castle, which is only about sort of 9 or so kilometres away from us, not that far. Well, Robert Dudley's father, John Dudley, and John Dudley's son, John Dudley, and John Dudley's brother, Ambrose Dudley, owned us here at Warwick. They actually invite Elizabeth I here for a party. They have courtyard banquets, they have river cruises up and down the Avon, and the whole thing finished with a fireworks show in the town, in which a firework got loose from a building, hit one of the buildings, and burnt down one and a bit of one. Elizabeth paid for that damage as she left, around £20 of her money, and she never came back again. Frankly, I don't think I really blame her. But the Dudleys have been our second line of Earls of Warwick, our second creation. When they died out, the title was given to the Rich family. They were our third line of Earls of Warwick, our third creation. They, though, didn't get the castle. Our castle and title were separated, and in 1604, our castle was given to a man named Sir Fulk Greville, the Baron Brooke. Now, Sir Fulk Greville was soon to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he was the Treasurer of the Navy, and he was a playwright and poet from a town near Stratford, a town pretty close to here. So he was a great ally for anyone to have, and he was given this castle by King James I of England, who you may know by another name. King James I of England is King James VI of Scotland, and if we talk about the gunpowder plot, that was about trying to blow him up. So it tells you a little bit about how well liked he was by people. He wasn't. People were trying to blow him up. And so he needed good allies. Fulk went to him and essentially said, "Can I have Warwick Castle, please? It's falling down and no one else wants it. And I have a very tenuous link to the Beauchamp family." And the king goes, "Yeah, go on then, why not?" So Fulk spends about £20,000 of his money, or in today's money, around about 3 to 4 million, though it is hard to scale it up, on rebuilding the place. He builds the Great Hall and staterooms down that way, and does not see them finished, as unfortunately Fulk was murdered at the age of around about 73, which is not too bad for someone in the 1600s, but he was murdered by his manservant over an argument surrounding £20, which is quite mean. When he died, his castle was given to his cousin, Robert Greville, who led us into the English Civil War, which is the Royalists on the side of King Charles I versus the Parliamentarians on the side of Oliver Cromwell. Quite a lot of castles are Royalist, they support the king. We were not Royalist, we were a Parliamentarian castle. And the best way to tell is by looking around you. We have walls and ceilings. Many royalist castles were knocked down after the Civil War, so they couldn't be used. Parliamentarian ones, they were allowed to stand. They weren't. That's why quite a lot of castles here in England are ruins. They chose the losing side. Robert did okay in the Civil War until about a year into it, when he was shot by a sniper at the Battle of Lichfield. He was actually one of the first people in history to be shot with a sniper, so congratulations to him, I suppose. He dropped down dead, his men took it as a sign of God, and his castle was given through his wife to Oliver Cromwell to be looked after. Both of our towers became prison towers once again, who were used as a munitions base for the Warwickshire Regiment. However, later on, Oliver Cromwell dies, the monarchy is restored, and the Greville family eventually get given their castle back. Eventually we get to Francis Greville, who goes to Parliament, petitions them and says, "I own the castle, can I be the Earl of Warwick, please?" And the answer was, "Yeah, fine." So Francis became our first Earl of Warwick. We're finally on that last stretch, the last creation. But Francis does not want a fortress, he wants a stately home. And so he hires the famous landscaper, Lancelot Capability Brown, to do our grounded courtyard. They plant large trees in front of the towers to hide how big and scary they are. They knock through the gates between Bear and Clarence and down towards the mound, so you don't have to come through the massive scary Barbican. They also say on a nice sunny day, those towers behind me make too much shadow here. So he's given the option, either knock 10 foot off the top of those, or raise our courtyard up by 10 feet. Thankfully, they chose the latter. We are now standing 10 foot above the original medieval courtyard.
Wow.
But all this restoration does cost a lot of money, and the Grevilles are known mainly for their partying, and so their family debt gets worse and worse and worse. We are open to tourism in 1815 to try and recoup some of that debt. So at that point, they are in about £13 million worth of debt. And unfortunately, it was not enough. And so in 1978, David Greville sells just everything. The grounds, the castle, the collection, all. Originally, he tried to just sell the collection. That was not enough. So he sold it all to a family friend, the owner of the Madame Tussauds Company, the waxwork company. He sold it all for £1.5 million. The whole thing, really. A little bit less than that, really, about 1.35, but not a lot of money, really. Now, Tussauds, though, very thankfully, do promise to pay off the family debts, which at that point, £15 million. So it sort of works itself out. The Grevilles can take their family and their money and go to Spain and various other countries to go reinvest it, which is fair enough. And then it's in the year 2007 that Merlin Entertainments buy out the Tussauds Company in what is said to be a £1 billion deal. That came with things like Warwick Castle, Alton Towers, the Sea Life Centre, the Dungeons Group, Legoland. I could list things for a while, as Merlin are the second largest entertainment company in the world, second only to that one beginning with D and ending with Isney. There are 10 slides to talk about here. They've also got castles, but theirs are made out of foam, and they're painted pink, so obviously something about our nice stone one. We do still have an Earl of Warwick, though. He is David's son, his name is Guy Greville, he is our 9th Earl of Warwick in our 4th line, and he lives in Spain, and Italy, and in Bali in Indonesia, and in Perth in Australia, and London, and America, basically anywhere but here, as he is invested, we think, into property and hotels. Essentially, he's a millionaire once again. The title of Earl of Warwick will pass down through his first wife's children, but us here at Merlin will be the ones to look after and restore bits of Warwick Castle when it occasionally likes to try and fall down on us a bit. And there you have it, there is 954 years of castle history in just about 30 minutes. If you have any questions about this or anything else, do please feel free to ask. My name is George, and thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's okay.
You got any questions about?
I think someone's at the lift that I need to go run for, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, you.
Thank you. Where should we go now? Do you want to go up the stairs?